Hey folks, thank you all for coming out today, and welcome to UBC if you haven't been here before. My name is Andre Marziali. I've met some of you, and that was a pleasure. I'm director of the Engineering Physics program here at UBC. And we are one of few, if not the only program that I think tries to run information events aimed at the high school level, because I think a lot of people understand the existence of electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, but if you're faced with the words engineering physics, it's not always clear what that means or what graduates from a program like that might do. So we have found it useful to run this event. And it's one of the few recruitment events we still run, because we have found over the years so many students have later come to me and said, you know, I've loved being in the program. I learned about it during your high school recruitment event and, you know, came to UBC for that reason and so forth. So I'm really glad it's been useful and hope it's useful to you. So before I start with the presentation, which, by the way, will be relatively informal, feel free to interrupt, ask questions. If you're coming in late, feel free to have a seat. What I'm going to try to do is help you answer, I think, the questions that you're trying to answer now for yourselves or for your children, depending, because I assume most of you are in high school, as to what to do, right? So I'm going to do that in a couple of ways. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this program and what it might offer, but I'm also going to tell you a little bit about my experience, because I went through this program, and it might also give you a bit of a data point of the sorts of career you might imagine having. So let me start with a bit of an introduction. So I went to high school here in Vancouver, North Van, and had a lot of different passions in high school. I mean, I enjoyed building model airplanes. I liked building stuff. I liked electronics, actually. So I did a little bit of hobby electronics at home. At school, I really liked math. I did all, you know, the high school math contests and all that stuff, and I really liked physics. So when I was applying to go to university, I was thinking of going into electrical engineering, actually. And actually sort of balancing that with maybe going into physics, and I couldn't quite decide. My brother was here at UBC, and he brought home a pamphlet of this program called Engineering Physics. And it was like, oh, great, I don't have to decide. I don't have to pick between engineering and physics. I can just do both. And it's the first of many times in my life where I've just avoided making decisions and tried to do a bit of everything, as you'll see in my career. So I came to UBC, enrolled in engineering physics, and spent 5 wonderful years here completing that program. Met some wonderful people that I'm still in touch with, and many are now colleagues in one form or another. You know, really enjoyed the engineering aspect of the program. But as I was getting towards my senior years, studying a little bit of nuclear physics and particle physics, I really fell in love with that side of it as well. So I actually decided to go do a physics PhD at Stanford with the intent of working on particle physics there. And started in that path, and then kind of refined that idea to still bringing the engineering back in, because as soon as I started doing more theoretical courses, I realized how much I missed actually building things. So I ended up, again, blending those two things together by working on particle accelerator design. So I actually worked on electrical, mechanical design of superconducting particle accelerators. That was my PhD thesis. And graduating from that, I got drawn into molecular biology, of all things. So, you know, my last biology course was Biology 11. But when I was just finishing my PhD, there was a professor at Stanford running the Stanford Human Genome Center that was looking for physicists and engineers for the Human Genome Project. And they wanted people that might be able to innovate in technology for genomics. So this is now, when was this? 1994? Right? So the Human Genome Project had been underway for almost 15 years. And, you know, what, 0.001% of the genome had been sequenced, and the goal was to finish by 2005, I think. So I think all the scientists knew that they needed some rapid technology development to be able to crank up how many bases of DNA you could sequence per day. So I started a group at the Genome Center there. That was a technology development group within the Genome Center. I hired a bunch of people out of my own PhD class. And we invented just a huge number of instruments and technologies, spun out several companies out of that, that really helped sort of drive the human genome effort forward. So I was really mostly building robots. which is what I teach here now, but for genomics. So again, did that for a few years, and then there was a job opening here at UBC in the physics department. So I came up to work as a professor in physics, but again, collaborating with the Michael Smith Genome Center as part of the Cancer Agency for technology development there, and actually started the technology development group that still operates now within the Genome Center. It's now run by one of my graduate students. So again, you know, mixing engineering with science, all sorts of sciences. Got into nanotechnology, which was super cool. So I spent a few years building nanometer scale machines to sequence DNA using proteins and nucleic acids and electric fields. So if you've heard of nanopore sequencing, I worked in that very early on. And then we started a biotech company. So myself and 5 other engineering physics grads that were in my lab at the time, and Dylan, who I'm sure you've chatted with, was one of them, invented something we decided we wanted to start a company around. So did that. And you know, more or less that brings me to where I am today. So I work in this company, Boreal Genomics, which we actually sold last fall. So declining my involvement there now, and spending more of my time again developing the engineering physics program here at UBC. So that's a long-winded introduction, but you can see how meandering my career has been. And if you talk to many of our graduates, you'll find that they've done the same thing. And I think part of the reason for that is that we've been gifted this incredibly broad technology background with a super deep knowledge of analytics, right, of physics and math. And I think that allows you to do a lot of different things. But now, you know, you're at a stage where you're trying to decide, or your children are trying to decide, you know, A, what school do you go to? Are you going to study science or engineering or something else for that matter? And, you know, I should say as a caveat, I'm very, very passionate about this program, obviously, not just because I studied it, but, you know, because of the benefits that I got from it. So I hope I don't sound too biased, but called me out on it. You know, there's a lot of good options, right? And even outside of science and engineering, obviously, depending on your passion is. And one thing I will say right up front is probably the most important thing to do is to do something that you are passionate about, because it's hard to be successful at something that you're not, right? Now, having said that, as many of my students, the students that we interview to come into this program, you may not know what you're passionate about. You may be open to a lot of different things, and that's, you know, what hopefully we can help with an event like this and to expose you to some things. But let me try to refine a little bit the difference between science and engineering, because you all study science in school. You've done biology, chemistry, and physics, presumably, or you're studying them now. And that's the beginning, right? I mean, and also don't make the mistake of getting turned off by some of those sciences depending on who the instructor is. I mean, my experience in high school biology was very poor. It was a lot of memorization. I didn't understand the beauty of it. So it wasn't until after my PhD that I fell in love with molecular biology, right? So keep an open mind. But as you study these sciences, I don't know how much of you get exposed to engineering, right? Some of you are in robotics programs, so you could do a little bit of engineering. But let me try to break down a little bit between the difference between science and engineering. And particularly in the things that you will do afterwards, right? There's a lot of similarities, right? You can go on to careers as a professor, as an instructor in science or engineering. You can do research in both, right? If you're going to do academic research, generally from science, you need a PhD. From engineering, you generally need some kind of graduate degree. Industry research you can get into from engineering quite easily, also from science. You know, so many of our students are snapped up by financial companies, trying to predict what the stock market's going to do, things like that. We've had students that go into medicine, obviously you can do from both, software, law, and so forth. You can start companies out of both. But I think there's one fundamental difference, which is that in engineering programs, you're being trained to make stuff, right? You're being trained to design and build things, and particularly to do it at scale. Right? So in a science graduate program, maybe you build a prototype for something. In an engineering program, you're really getting the know-how to eventually go out there and build products that will be mass-produced for society. Right? Whereas in science, you're often, you know, you're studying more of the fundamental theories, you're studying more of the things that might lead you to discovery. okay? Publishing scientific papers and advancing the field of science in of itself and advancing knowledge. And both are exciting, right? But a lot of the students that come into our program are looking to do both. They do want discovery, they want the innovation side, but they also want to be able to make things that are useful for society. And that's the program that we offer, right? So engineering physics fundamentally is an honors physics degree plus a broad engineering degree. It's almost like a dual major. You graduate with a single parchment, but it's effectively a dual major in physics and engineering. And the engineering side of it is broad. It's electrical, mechanical, and software, right? So anything that's going to move electromechanically, right, we've got that covered. But what we have, right, is that's different from the other engineering programs is we have this deep physics and math training and analytics that you can use, I think, to get to the discovery side, right? So if you study engineering, if you study electrical engineering, you can design electrical circuits. If you study mechanical engineering, you can design mechanical systems. But if you're going to try to tackle problems that no one has ever tackled before, you kind of have to go back to the fundamental laws of physics usually, right? And really have some intuition about how things work in the world around you before you can make some advance. Now, the area you apply that to can be, anything almost, right? And these are random snapshots of areas that our students work in or that we work in. But I've seen almost everything pursued out of our program. So the application area almost doesn't matter. What engineering physics gives you is sort of the fundamental background to be able to tackle really, really hard problems, right? That is becoming more and more important, of course. I mean, the problems that the world is facing are immense and urgent, and a lot of them require at least intuition of how physical systems work. And it doesn't matter, in my mind, whether you're going to work as an engineer, a scientist, or a policymaker, right, in these areas. Because a lot of these areas actually need policy solutions and legal solutions as much as they do technical solutions. But I think you're going to be poorly suited to even come up with policy changes if you don't understand fundamentally how things work, right? So I know a lot of our students come into the program motivated to make some useful impact, whether it's in medicine or climate or energy and things like that. And I think they will graduate well suited to start their careers in that direction. So to answer the most common question that I get, what's the difference between engineering physics and electrical engineering or mechanical engineering or what have you? It's fundamentally that all our engineering programs at UBC are meant to train engineers, right? Obviously, and that's great. We are somewhere in between, right? We're training people that can work as engineers, but a lot of our graduates end up working as what I would call research engineers, right? So the difference would be that they're going to go work at a company in a job where there are some unknowns. Design is not often like that, right? I mean, you may go work for Tesla, and Tesla may say, okay, we're developing a new version of the Model 3. We need you to design the suspension. Great. So a mechanical engineer could figure out, suspension design, how to make it nice and light so it handles well. Someone that has an engineering physics background that might go work at a company like that may be told, okay, we want to design suspension for the new car, but we don't want to be bound by the causality of current suspension systems where they react to bumps in the road. We would like to predict what's going to happen. We want you to make an active suspension with sensors, and maybe the shock absorbers are electrically controlled, or maybe that's not even good enough. You have to come up with a different kind of shock absorber that no one's ever come up with before. Does that make sense, right? You're fundamentally well placed to handle harder problems that are more open-ended and where the solutions are less obvious. And historically, that's been called invention, right? So in a somewhat archaic sense, that's what we do. We educate inventors, that people that want to come up with novel solutions to things. And if you look around us, let me pick two well-known inventors, one famous, one infamous. They both have backgrounds in physics. Now, I always cringe a little bit to myself putting up slides with Elon Musk. I'm not a huge fan of him as a person, but he's been very clever. And the intuition he had around the companies that started has been impressive, right? Both around Tesla, SpaceX, Hyperloop, you name it. You can't deny that, right? I mean, how he's managed his shareholders is a different story, but and public perception. But you know, he was able to do those things because he had training in physics, and I think that gave him intuition and fundamentally how technology worked. And Tim Berners-Lee, who fundamentally invented the World Wide Web, right, at the beginning of the internet, also trained in physics. And you'll find that of a lot of entrepreneurs. So, you know, why is that, right? Because you see entrepreneurs in fields outside of physics that also have physics training. And I mean, I remember doing a trip to Silicon Valley when I was trying to raise money and build collaborations for my company, which is a biotech firm. And I was meeting with, I think, 6 other biotech companies. And something like 4 or 5 out of the 6 were run, the CEO was a physicist. And these were biotech companies, right? So it doesn't, at some level, it doesn't make a lot of sense until you realize there's an analytical and problem-solving toolkit that physicists learn that I don't think anyone else learns quite the same way, right? And you get it by being thrown incredibly hard problems that don't look like they can be solved, right? So in my PhD qualifying exams, you know, which it was 18 hours of exam over 3 days, 9 physics questions, right? 2 hours each. This was for the PhD qualifiers. You know, a 2-hour physics question, what does that look like, right? I remember one of them was like a 1-sentence question. It's like, the question was something like, derive the ratio of some neutrino to another neutrino as emitted by the sun. Right? 2 hours. I can't remember how I solved it. But point being is like you're faced with this incredibly horrible problem. You're like, okay, let's go back a step. You know, what do we do? Okay, let's break down which reactions happen in the sun, what's produced there, and so forth. So it got into a lot of particle and quantum mechanics. But that's what we're trained at. We're trained at tackling problems that other people would throw up their hands and start crying or walk away from, right? That's what we do. So I think that's where innovation comes, and I think that's why even a lot of business leaders end up having that kind of analytical problem-solving background. Let me give you another and more personal anecdote from my company, right? So how did I end up starting a biotech company? Like I said, I'd worked in genomics before I came here. One of the things I was doing at Stanford for years was trying to figure out how to concentrate DNA. Right? For a lot of applications of DNA sequencing, like you just never have enough DNA to sequence properly, particularly if you're looking at environmental samples. And sometimes it's badly contaminated. So there's all this stuff around, you know, how do you purify DNA, how do you concentrate it, and I've been working on that for years. And then when I was at UBC, a few years in, so this is early 2000s, I was brainstorming with a colleague who worked on electronic displays. So we both worked with something called electrophoresis, which is a method for electrically moving molecules around in a fluid. And collectively we came up with this, which you don't have to piece through, except those of you in high school ought to at least recognize trig identities in there somewhere. But it's not, you know, there's some calculus here which you probably don't know. There's a little bit of biophysics buried in here, like the first equation of the velocity of DNA is the square of the electric field. That's something that I knew for working with DNA and well known by biophysicists, but others may not know. And we realized that, just going through this physics and math derivation completely theoretically, that if we applied these fields to DNA in a liquid, it ought to concentrate, right? And so no one else was going to come up with this, where, you know, why would you come up with a rotating dipole field with a rotating quadrupole field that spins twice as fast, right? You know, you can't just come up with that. It falls out of the math, right? But if you do that, it ought to say that DNA would focus into a spot in the center of a gel matrix, right, with no electrochemistry there. It's not, you can't focus DNA on an electrode, right? DNA is negatively charged. But if you try to run it to a positive electrode, electrochemistry destroys it, so that's useless, right? But this actually focused it into a spot where there were no electrodes, so it could be stable and you could salvage it from there to go sequence it. So in theory, right? anyways, we had this idea, and we thought, well, okay, it's too early to go get a grant to study it. Let's just hire a second-year engineering physics student to try it out. It can't be that hard. So we made a little thing, right, with 4 electrodes. We couldn't quite get the fields rotating. We made them rotate at 90 degrees, whatever. It was an approximation. So this poor student that came in did this as a co-op job for 4 months. And it would not work, right? Put DNA in this gel, it would just diffuse away. Nothing would happen. It would kind of move around. And then after 4 months of not working, he decided to enroll for another 4 months of co-op with me, and I've never quite understood why. That was a very good decision in the end. But why do we keep trying? Right? Why not give up after the first week and say, oh, well, that didn't work. Something must be wrong. And the reason is this, is that I had built a computer simulation that would model what happens under those electric fields. And this is the actual simulation. It's on some rather archaic piece of software now. But what you're going to see in the simulation is all the little dots are meant to be DNA molecules. I've encoded in here that nonlinearity, the fact that the velocity of DNA is the square of the electric field, which is a key issue. And you can simulate the motion of the DNA molecules as you apply these rotating electric fields. And you can see them move around in orbits because the electric fields are rotating, sort of. But over time, they're focusing. Now, in that simulation, I've exaggerated the orbit. If you actually do it more realistically, the orbits are actually too small to be visible, but all the DNA just slowly drifts towards the center, right? And the reason it's X-shaped instead of just a smooth, circular compression is because the electrodes are finite. We have 4 electrodes instead of an infinite number of electrodes, and that's where you get the X shape and all that. So that's all in simulation. And that's actually what kept us trying it, because in the end, if the physics behind that is first and second year physics, we know that's correct, right? We know the math is correct. The simulation was correct. We could check it and double check and know it was right. So if all that stuff was working and the experiment wasn't, something was wrong with real life, right? And I think in the end, that's why physics is so important. It's the only reliable tool for predicting the future, right? If you understand the physics of something, you can predict how something will work. And ultimately, the challenge is then to be designing it or implementing it correctly. So what it turned out is that as we were applying the electric fields to focus the DNA, this effect is just really small. And it was being overwhelmed by slight inaccuracies in the voltages. So we wanted to apply 9 volts or something. 8.99 was not good enough. 9.001 wasn't good enough. It had to be like spot on to like something like 4 or 5 decimal places. And once we fixed that, we got this. And let me just dim the lights for a second because this is hard to see. So what you see here is like a 2 by 2 centimeter gel full of liquid and DNA. The glow that you see is the DNA itself. It was a viral DNA that's been stained. So it glows under ultraviolet light. And once we got the voltages right, watch what actually happened. It looks exactly like the simulation, including the little X shape that comes from the electrode shapes, right? And that's, that's where we went. So that, almost 2 weeks, I think, it was almost Christmas before the end of the student's 8-month co-op term, he finally made this work. And then him and I, Dylan, and 3 others from my lab decided that, this is actually really powerful. No one's ever seen anything like this before. It was fundamentally novel. We got a lot of awards and stuff around it. So we thought, let's start a company. And we started Boreal Genomics. Then we started, working in forensics. It was really an exciting time. And we worked with the RCMP, actually pulling DNA off murder weapons once. We worked with people trying to understand bacteria growing in the oil sands to get better and more environmentally friendly extraction of oil. We ended up being funded by Homeland Security, by Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and ultimately by the CIA. As you might imagine, the US government has enormous interest in detecting biowarfare attacks. So there's machines in the New York subway that harvest the air and pull bacteria and viruses out of it and sequence them to detect pathogens. Okay, I'm sure they're not labeled, but they're there. So we worked on technologies like that for them. And that helped fund the start of our company. Not really what we wanted to do, though, right? I mean, we saw forensics was a potentially interesting field, but we were happy to take the $10 million or so of funding from the US government. But what we really wanted to do was do something in medicine. And, you know, again, I had a version of that computer simulation I just showed you, but modified it to ask the question, could we concentrate cancer DNA, but concentrate it in a way where we would separate it from normal DNA? And the goal, and this was 2007, right? I don't know if you've heard the terms liquid biopsy, right? But we realized there was an opportunity to develop blood tests to help detect and profile cancer, right? So cancer is obviously a very difficult to treat disease, very invasive, and it eludes pharmaceuticals at some point. And one of the best ways to treat, of course, is early detection, but most detection modalities are just expensive, so you can't apply them to the whole population. So there's been a lot of thought around, okay, well, if you could just do a blood test, you know, you go up for your yearly checkup with your doctor, you do a bunch of blood work on glucose and whatever. What if you could pull a tube of blood and actually test for cancer, right? So give people an early warning if they were harboring a tumor somewhere at the time when it could still be removed surgically before it spreads. But even if you do have a solid tumor, you might have some DNA from that tumor floating around in your bloodstream. It will be different, right? I mean, because tumors are tumors because there's DNA mutations. So every tumor will harbor at least 6 or 7 mutations out of 3 billion bases, right? But that DNA that may be floating in your bloodstream might be there at 1 copy in a million compared to your normal DNA. So this is a really, really serious needle in a haystack issue, right? How do you find a few bases in 3 billion that differ in 1 molecule out of 10,000 or 100,000 or a million? So we figured out a way to separate that cancer DNA from the normal DNA so that you could actually sequence it. And by the way, for reference, you could, because maybe you've already thought of the obvious solution. Well, why don't you pull all the DNA out and just sequence it all, get a lot of data, right? But sequencing machines make a mistake roughly 1 in every 1,000 nucleotides. So like the mistakes would overwhelm the data, right? So what we figured out is like, wait a second, I think we can take that electrical focusing and change it so we only focus cancer DNA, right? And we built the machine, which is actually sitting outside there now, or one that's been ripped apart a little bit. And I'm going to show you a little video. There's 2 strands of DNA that come into this picture. So the green that you're seeing right now is just plastic fluorescing, right? You'll see the strands of DNA when they come in, or bands of, you know, millions of strands. One's labeled in red, one's labeled in green. The difference between them is 1 nucleotide. And I think they're something like 300 nucleotides long, right? So they're fragments of DNA. And what's happening is in the gel now, we've encoded the DNA that matches a tumor signature and are specifically binding to that to extract it. So watch how well they separate. We actually got them so they would go in opposite directions. So the tumor DNA gets focused towards the center where it can be extracted and sequenced, and the normal DNA, which is going to be thrown out, goes the other way. So we built a company around that, right? And evolved it. You know, we eventually actually sold off this technology because we invented a whole other technology that was better, which I won't talk at all about today. And that technology will be part of our acquirer's early cancer detection tests in the next couple of years. You should see them on the market. There's some confidentiality here, so I can't tell you who acquired us and all that. But anyways, it turned out to be a huge success, right? So now, from my perspective, I'm done. Like, we did all the invention bit, we did the coming up with crazy stuff no one else had thought about. The company that bought us has like a $10 billion market cap, right? 3,000 employees are huge. You'd recognize some of the other tests they offer. When they bought us, the number of patents they held doubled because we brought so many to the company, right? So that's how inventive we were, and we were 5 people when they bought us. anyways, so pretty proud of that. But how did we start, right? This is how we started, and I love this picture. That's Dylan. As a, what, 22-year-old or something? How young were you? We were all a lot younger. That's me. This is 5 of the 6 of us. The 6th was actually taking this picture. All graduates of this program, right? So obviously I graduated many years ago, but I taught first-year physics to almost all these guys. Anyways, the beauty of it was that with the breadth of training that we had, not only could we develop the science, I mean, as you can imagine, there's a lot of electricity and magnetism, a lot of thermal physics, there's a lot of understanding of, like, you know, reptation of DNA through gels, so some more complex biophysics, diffusion. But then we also had to, like, we had to build stuff, right? We started out with no money. There were literally, right, we didn't have funding when we started the company, except for money that we put in ourselves. So this is literally us in one of our co-founders' basements, building the first 3 machines that were going to go to the Cancer Agency here in Vancouver, the McGill Genome Center, and then one down in a company in San Diego, which is what led to all the US defense contracts. But you know, with the training that we had, we were able to design our own electrical circuits. We were able to do our own mechanical design, right? We were able to write the software, right? We just did all of that ourselves. And that's how we started the company. All right, so that's the real, you know, I wanted to tell you that whole story. I know it was quite long, but that's the power of having the engineering plus the physics knowledge, right? Is that you can really take just a random crazy idea and actually translate it into a real product that actually has a societal impact. So we're not the only ones, I think, and there's a poster outside on this, but we realized, actually, I think I did this a few years ago now, just the program tends to lead to entrepreneurship. It's not an entrepreneurship program. Don't mistake it for that. It's not a business program. It's a hardcore science and engineering program. But that kind of training does lead to innovation, which often leads to company formation. And across a lot of fields, like I said, it's not unusual. Even our foray into biology and biotech is not unusual. So during 2020, towards the end of 2020, I think, maybe it was early 21, but our premier gave a throne speech around COVID, right? You know, partly to thank the province, the health system for what it had done, and also to thank some local companies that had helped address the issues. As you remember, there was a shortage of respirators, right? Everyone was madly trying to come up with drugs and vaccines. And the premier acknowledged 3 companies in BC that really helped with COVID. Abcelera for drug development, right? And they developed some of the earliest COVID drugs. Precision Nanosystems, also on the pharmaceutical side, and Starfish Medical, who very rapidly ramped up to make new kinds of respirators and produce them for the province. All 3 of those companies founded and run by engineering physics grads from this program. So Carl Hansen, Scott Phillips, and James Taylor. Right? Scott Phillips was one of my classmates back in '89 when I graduated. Carl was actually one of my students. So it's pretty impressive success from my perspective. Again, very proud of this, and I'm incredibly proud to be associated with the program. I don't take any credit for these things. It's just I'm happy to be part of it. And acknowledging, though, that if these things are going to happen, we actually need to try to do what we can to prepare our students for those kinds of futures. And even if our students are not necessarily running a company or founding a company, they end up in leadership positions, right? I mean, when you're that well versed in technology and you go to work even in a company, you're likely to end up in charge of product development, in charge of some research group and so forth, right? So what we cover in our program is a lot of what you see, right? There's electrical engineering, mechanical, and so forth, but we also work pretty hard at communication skills, leadership skills. Teamwork is absolutely critical in engineering physics. All our project courses are team-based, right? Because it's just no one works alone in real life, right? So if you don't know how to work with people, and it's challenging, right? I mean, the robot course that you see out there, teams of 4, it's really the first real high-stress teamwork environment that we provide to our students. And I mean, you know, it's amazing to watch some of the team breakdowns, which you might expect, right? When people have different opinions on how the robot should be built or how to fix it the night before the competition, you get some interesting moments. To me, those are some of the best learning moments in the course, right? I mean, they can learn the engineering, but if they can learn how to work with people with different opinions in moments of high stress, that's going to go a long way. So we work on everything. We're starting with, you know, mindfulness and emotional intelligence all the way to, you know, to the engineering side. So very big part of our program. And again, one that we're relatively, you know, we're proud to sort of be relatively at the forefront of developing. Lots of project work in engineering physics, okay? So if you look at the calendar, you'll see there's a lot of math, there's a lot of physics, right? So there's a big theoretical component to the course. Also pretty big project component. I do want to show you a quick video from the robot course. This is a video that some of our students made a few years ago. It's actually quite old, I think. It's from the 2004 robot competition, which is incredibly 18 years ago. But it's still, in my opinion, one of the best and funniest videos that were made. So this gives you a sense of what our team-based project courses are like, and I'll just show this and just enjoy for a few minutes.
This hike looks easy. I don't need any food, water, or extra clothing.
Captain, we've detected a fallen hiker.
Are they unprepared?
Yes, he has no extra food, water, or clothing.
Okay, launch the automated rescue robot.
So the 2004 competition, the robots had to autonomously follow that black electrical tape. It ended. They had to follow an infrared beacon to the doll, detect the edge of the cliff, and then rescue a doll that had fallen off the cliff. That was the final exam. Fully autonomous. All the students could do is press start on the robot and it had to do its own thing. And all the solutions you see, the students came up with all of them, right? We give them the resources and, you know, we teach them about design and electronics and so forth, but there's some really, really clever solutions to this. And then the final exam, as it still is a public competition, so anyone can attend.
Go. All right, folks, I want to hear you make some noise for these robots right now. Put your hands together, there you go. Because I know the Marvin, it doesn't always get to the end of the clip, but it's always hardcore. Here we go. Oh, and it's going. It's going. It's going to be a rescue. Oh, baby. See. Yeah, baby. Wow, that was awesome. It's finding the IR. It's moving forward. Come on, there we go. Okay, the salad, these are salad sauce or barbecue sauce. Here we go. It's gonna go. It's right in there. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's going to the cliff. It's going to the cliff. It's gonna do a rescue. Oh my God. Yeah, baby. All right. Meanwhile, beaming up Scotty. Come back up one more time. Okay, gets around the corner this time. It's racing for the cliff edge. It's racing and slowing down. That's good. That's good. It's stopping. Here we go. The sticky hand of inevitability. Come on. There goes the Oh, here we go. Come on. Oh, wait. Fantastic. No time? Okay. I think you guys are running. Oh, dear me. Oh, go ahead with Chewy up on the far side. They're going up. They're going up. Come on, come on, come on. No, don't do that. Come on, come around. And here comes Mimi up. And Mimi up. Drop it. And they go. Gardens. Locked on. There's the tree. You pick the tree. Oh, they didn't quite get it. That's going to be hard.
Yeah, super fun, and it has been for years. We'll do it again this summer. Haven't decided yet with the competition. We change it every year. It's way more complex now. So one of the nice things of our program is it's actually really well funded. We've had, as you can tell, a very large number of successful alumni. So in the last year alone, we've had something like $2 million donated directly to the project lab. So we have water jet cutters, laser cutters, 3D printers, really advanced. You guys just bought a super expensive oscilloscope, I think. Really, really advanced tools that our students can use at the undergrad level, which is sort of unusual at UBC. Some of the more expensive machines tend to be saved for faculty research. We bought them explicitly for undergrad use. So these students can build whatever. It's really interesting watching that video because it's now long enough ago. I can look at some of the students and see where they've gone. The student that fell down the cliff actually co-founded a biotech company. I was on his board of directors, and that sold successfully a couple of years ago. And then one of the students on the second place team is actually still working with me at Boreal Genomics in bioinformatics. So, and there's a whole others. Watching, I like to see where people have ended up. Yeah, so a lot of great success out of the program, which is fantastic. Yeah, I think you've seen a little bit of what's outside in terms of projects that have been made by the students. I will say something, as someone pointed that out, and I think it's quite fair. Some of the material in those posters is incredibly complex. Like, I don't understand it. I mean, only people that would be like deep in the field would understand it, right? So don't be frightened by what you see there. You will eventually learn that, right? I mean, some of that stuff you can't understand unless you've taken third-year quantum mechanics or fourth-year, E&M or what have you. So, but that's what we do, right? We eventually put you in a place where you can do that. And imagine having the abilities to build those robots, but being an expert in quantum mechanics and advanced differential equations, right? It's just an incredibly powerful tool set. I would urge you to go to the calendar and have a look at what the actual program entails. This is a snapshot of what we do. We are integrated with the co-op program, so if you come into Eng Phys, you're pretty much, I mean, you can opt out, but almost no one does, in the co-op program where you get industry placements in the middle of your school as well. So second year, for example, there's one term of school that you go to industry for a term, you come back from the robot course, which is that Eng Phys 253. I've highlighted in yellow all the project courses that we have. So we have 2-year-long capstone project courses, which is what the posters outside are from. So a lot of project work. So we end up graduating students that are just really good at engineering as well as science. About half of them go work as engineers, right? I mean, and some of them take jobs that would otherwise be taken by electrical or mechanical engineers or software engineers, right? And they'll work at companies like Tesla and Google and Microsoft and you name it, right? I think we've had people almost everywhere. Some do start companies. We have, on the average, of one company spin off a year out of engineering physics, which again, I think is an impressive statistic, given that it's not a business program. About a third of our students will go do PhDs. Now, here's another interesting fact, and I've found this hiring in biotech, right? Engineering is one of the few disciplines where you can actually get highly paid, high responsibility jobs from undergraduate, right? So the second in command of my company as an undergraduate at Eng Phys, Dylan, who ran our engineering team, just did his undergraduate. He didn't do graduate work. The one person that did graduate work, did his PhD, ran the R&D team, right? So if you're going to run R&D in a company or obviously do academic research, you need a PhD. But otherwise, from engineering, you can actually get pretty impressive jobs just with an undergrad degree, which unfortunately, and I don't know why, is not true of the life sciences. There, unfortunately, PhD level people will actually take relatively entry-level jobs, even at our company, despite having advanced degrees. So engineering is actually great in that respect, but which is also true, obviously, of computer science and fields like that. We're just really highly employable. Having said that, about a third of our students go to the grad schools. The grad schools know us. We have a huge number of people at Stanford. We have people that go to MIT, Harvard, Caltech, and in Europe as well, ETH Zurich, and so forth. So we're pretty well known both within industry, but also within the world's graduate schools, the top schools. And we do have students that go and will go to med school. We've seen people go to law. I've seen almost everything done out of the program. you know, and it's just some of the things that our students come up with. I just want to show you a few projects from the senior project courses. These are a couple of students that built an emotion sensing robot. Where you can't see that's happening is that the robot looks at you, senses your facial expression, and then mimics it back to you. So if you look angry at it, its eyes would go red and little eyebrows would stick up. It was super cute. Anyways, you know, they decided they were going to start a robotics company. So they started a little company called Nascent Robotics, and they asked me to be on their board, which lasted all of a few months, I think, because then they were absorbed into Sanctuary. Does anyone know Sanctuary AI? It's a local artificial intelligence and robotics company. They're trying to build fully humanoid robots for the service industry. It's interesting and somewhat controversial, I will say, but there's not much to share because they keep things pretty confidential. But this was in the Globe and Mail. It's one of the robots they built. And our students built that chassis for that robot with manufacturing techniques that they came back and then taught back to us because it was so advanced. Just impressive work. But again, done by these two students. At the time they did this, they hadn't even graduated yet. They just took some time off to work in this company. And then we have other, you know, recent graduates. Alex Harmson, who graduated maybe 6 or 7 years ago, went to the Bay Area, started a drone collision avoidance company, so developing hardware and software for beyond line of sight drone flight, where they could autonomously avoid collisions, and you know, raised $8 million or something in the Bay Area. He's running a big team down there now. And of course, this Carl Hansen. You know, if you had to chart the economic output of engineering physics at UBC, everything's irrelevant except Accelera. Because they went from nothing to being worth, you know, $16 billion or something overnight, with Carl being, I think, the second wealthiest person in Canada now. He made $8 billion overnight, basically, when the company went public. So he's donated money back to the program, which is great. So like I said, we're well funded. Lots of people that went through the program love us and are being very kind. So, and this will be true whether you come to engineering physics or any other UBC engineering programs. You've met people from UBC Orbit. We have a lot of wonderful extracurricular design teams where you can work on race cars, you can work on autonomous sailboats, rockets, satellites, right? You name it, including some biochemical ones like BEST. Okay, that's a bioengineering team. And you know, and I will say, so as a North Van High School student, I came to UBC because it was here. Like I didn't look around. I didn't go. It was either UBC or SFU, right? I didn't look at schools in the States because that would have been stupidly expensive or elsewhere. And I think we sometimes make the mistake of taking UBC for granted, but it's like, I don't know, in the worldwide university rankings, what is it, 30 or something? It's a really good school, right? Our rocket team a few years ago went to one of the first, these rocket competitions and won. Like they beat MIT, they beat Caltech, right? Our soccer playing robots, again, these slides are a bit old now. I'm sure we've had other successes since, but they did super well at RoboCup a few years ago. I think they won. So a great place to be, right? You know, I think you got to ask yourself, if you are a high school student, is this what you like to do? Do you like to build stuff? Do you like physics? If you like those two things, come to our program, right? It's hard work. It's probably the hardest program offered at UBC, possibly one of the hardest in Canada, right? So your typical science degree at UBC is 120 credits. Engineering physics is 177, squeezed into 5 years. So it is hard work, right? But the benefits are huge if you can manage the work. If you're good at math, that helps immensely. Because there's a lot of math courses. The physics courses are very heavily mathematical. The electrical engineering courses are heavily mathematical, right? So something to be said about being good at math before you come into this. So, you know, the last thing I wanted to say is that you're thinking careers, right? You're thinking, you know, am I going to be able to afford to live in Vancouver? Right, so you got to make some money. You want to enjoy your job, right? But I think there's something beyond that I've found just incredibly empowering to study physics, right? Completely outside. I mean, of course, it's been useful in my job. Everything I've done work-wise has had physics in it. But it turns out my hobbies actually benefited from the physics as well. Like this fact, if you know engineering and you know physics, you can do almost anything you want, right? So one of the things I do as a hobby is I race cars, and I basically build my own. So this is the car. It was a BMW M3, and then I chopped it to bits and rebuilt it in carbon fiber and boosted its output. But you know, all my competitors, this is the Knox Mountain Hill Climb in Kelowna. All my competitors do the same thing. That, you know, a lot of them are mechanics, whatever. They can build cars. What I could do that they can't do, right, is I did computational fluid dynamics of the car to try to optimize the aerodynamics, right? And that really helped. Actually, I was Canadian hill climb champion in 2018. You know, and then it's completely on a completely different tangent. Actually, not a hobby at all, but just a couple of friends of mine started a distillery called The Woods. It's in North Van. Some of you may, if you go to a nice cocktail bar, you see their Amaro and their gin and their Nocino now. And when I met them, they were making 1 liter at a time. They were doing vacuum distillation, so the Amaro's vacuum distilled. And they're like, we need to scale this up to a real still. How do we do that? And they came to me and my friend Robin, who was one of my PhD students, also Eng Phys grad, runs the tech dev at the cancer agency. And with the hubris of any Eng Phys grad, we're like, we can do that, no problem. We don't know anything about distillation. And we didn't, but we applied, well, I did the physics behind it. I just applied physics scaling laws, right, around, you know, what's going to scale with surface area, what scales with volume, what scales with temperature, right, and designed a still for them that they use to this day. And there it is. Robin did all the mechanical design and had it manufactured, and off you go. I still don't know anything about distillation, right? But understanding the principles behind it, the physics principles behind it, allowed us to get the design right and have it actually work. Anyways, so yeah, silly examples, but I think maybe give you a sense of how empowering it is to understand physics. So with that, I hope that some of you will consider joining us. We'll be around here for another hour. I'll be here, so feel free to ask questions. But thank you very much. Oh my God. Also, thank you. There's something I didn't bring up at all. Yeah, let me repeat the question and then go on from there, because the question was, what should I do in high school to prepare, presumably? Have fun would have been my first question, but hopefully you're doing that. Engineering physics admits out of first-year engineering. All the programs do, right? So your path from high school is you apply to UBC, right? You apply to UBC Applied Science, you go into first-year UBC Engineering, and then I'll come to your classes and talk, and we talk about admissions and all of that, right? So it is competitive. We take 60 students a year. We have something on the order of 150 to 200 people applying, all with pretty good grades. So you kind of have to have A's in first year, like not 90%, but 80%, right? And you know, that certainly will help. So in high school, what your goal is to try to get into UBC Engineering if you want to come to this program, right? And for that, I think there's some courses, you know, just go to the website and see what the requirements are. You almost certainly need Physics 12, you know, pre-Calc 12 or even Calculus 12 if they have it. Probably another science, English, right? You know, so look at the requirements. But let me say one thing that I think is like a secret that's somehow been missed. So when you apply to UBC, you're writing a personal statement somewhere, right? I don't know how many of you have gone through that process or are about to go through it. And yeah, for those of you in grade 12, that you've done this already. For those of you in earlier grades, you're going to benefit from this. Because I was a reader on those statements for a while for engineering, right? So what happens, UBC Central reads all those statements and they make an evaluation, but then they send it to the school and say, okay, UBC Engineering, what do you think of these students? Read their statements and score them. And UBC Engineering has some leeway to actually almost override UBC Central in admissions, right? Anyway, so I was reading all the personal statements, and it was shocking, personal statement students that applied to UBC Engineering, how few of them mentioned engineering. Like if you actually wrote, I have a passion for engineering in that statement, 10 out of 10, right? And actually very, very few students did that. So if you're going to apply to engineering, please mention that you like engineering. And if you have some personal project aspect, right? So talk about what you do in high school. I mean, if you do robotics, great, mention that. Like none of that stuff shows up on your transcript, right? If you've like built a particle accelerator in your basement, mention that. Anyways, no, just kidding, don't. Whatever, but any projects you've done I think would be worth mentioning on your personal statement. They do count quite a bit, because the reality of our world right now is that everyone in high school has 97%, right? The grades have become so compressed, like the grades that we see. I mean, sure, I'm sure there's people in high school that have like 60%, but the grades that we see all vary between, 88 and 97 or 98 or something, right? And it's become quite difficult to pick students. So more and more emphasis is now placed on that statement. So take that very, very seriously. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you differentiate between the IB students and non-IB students in terms of grades?
I actually don't know the answer to that. By the time I'm doing the selection, it's all first year UBC grades, so I don't have to worry. I do know, and I don't know how they do it, again, whether it's done at the personal statement level, what you can adjust someone's admission score or whatever it is. Can you repeat the question? Oh, I'm sorry. How do we differentiate between people that have done IB versus people that have done the regular programs in terms of their grades? And yeah, thanks. So UBC Central must do something, and I don't actually know what they do, but I know there is some preference for students that have gone through IB. Yeah. AP also is beneficial. I think a lot of those students, if you've done any AP courses, some students choose to take those credits so they don't have to take Math 100, they don't have to take Physics 157. Honestly, if you have AP credits, I still think it's worth taking the first year courses. You'll just do that much better. And if you're in engineering particularly, right, where your first year marks matter for second year placement, it's actually a huge marks booster to be doing the courses when you have some advanced knowledge. So that would be my advice. But you can also choose, by the way, if you have credit like for all of first year math, you can just do second year math in first year, and if you're confident that you'll do well, that also looks incredibly good to me. If you've gotten 85% in Math 253 instead of, 95% in Math 100, that's almost better. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you have any tips on like starting a business as like a young person?
Yeah. Do I have any tips on starting a business as a young person? Find some senior mentors that would be willing to help. There's a lot of mistakes that we made, and I'm hardly young, but young to entrepreneurship, I suppose, when we started. And even we went out and found senior mentors. So the chairman of my board was my Stanford PhD classmate and roommate, actually. I lived with him for a while, who, when I came in and started my professor position here, he started a company in California and had just sold it for like 120 million and been very successful, and was starting a second company when I invited him to be a chair of our board. And we learned a lot from him. He had been through the whole cycle from starting the company, growing it, to selling it, and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, I could spend an hour talking about entrepreneurship, right? I mean, also, as a technology person, which I assume you are if you're here, the biggest mistake that we make is to assume that if we build something super cool, people will want to buy it. Yeah, it's not always true, right? So do your market research first before you spend any money, before you get too far. Because I think one of the big things to be able to raise money to start a company is demonstrating a market and demonstrating that people will buy something. But find senior mentors that will tell you those things. Other questions?